Call this meeting to order. Tuesday, October 19th, 2021, 6:05 p.m. City of Somerton work session. We're gonna forego all formalities and just go to roll call, and then we're gonna go into our presentation.
Mayor Gerardo Anaya.
Present.
Vice Mayor Juan Castillo. Councilmember Jesus Roldan.
Present.
Councilmember Luis Galindo.
Present.
Councilmember Martha Garcia.
Present.
Councilmember Miguel Villalpando. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. The item we have is a presentation regarding the proposed land use assumptions and infrastructure improvement plan related to public safety facilities, wastewater facilities, and transportation facilities development fees.
Evening, Mayor, members of council. Tonight we have the presentation. This is for the land use assumptions and the infrastructure improvement plan related to public safety facilities, wastewater facilities, and transportation or streets facility development impact fees. For the past few months, staff has been working together with Ben Griffin from Teacher Advice. This is the consulting firm that the city has hired to do this update. Ben is here tonight, and I would like to invite him to do the presentation of the land use assumptions and the infrastructure improvement plan.
Mayor, council members, good to see all of you tonight. It's been, 2 years since we adopted the parks and water fees. So now we've moved on to public safety, streets, and wastewater. I do have a presentation that we'll go through. I can make this as informal as we need. I figured, since this is a work session, ask all your questions that way when we actually get to the council meeting at 7. I can just do like a quicker, higher level. That way you're not hearing everything exactly the same twice. So, all right, if you want to skip ahead to the next one. So tonight, I'll give an overview of development fee basics for anyone who was not here last time, or you've just forgotten, somebody need a quick refresher course. We're gonna look at the land use assumptions because that's something very important to this first round. Then we'll look at the infrastructure improvements plan for public safety, streets, and wastewater. And then we'll look at a fee summary. All right, next slide, please. All right, so when we're talking about development fees, there are 3 things we have to prove: need, proportionality, and benefit. So need, we're going to show you the land use assumptions. We're showing that you have continued growth, so that proves the need for these additional capital improvements. Next up, the proportionate share. We need to vary the fees because different types of land uses generate different demands for services. So, an easy way of doing that, with residential is to say, your single family occupancy is higher than your multifamily. So if we're looking at fees per person on your residential side, then multifamily should pay less than single family because they have fewer occupants. So that's one way of, varying the proportionate share. And then next up is benefit. So we look at benefit in 2 ways. The first is a geographic service area. So we want to make sure that the fee payer is, close enough to receive a benefit. And the second is that if someone gives you money for an impact fee, that you actually spend that. So, the benefit goes 2 ways with that one. You need to live close enough to, receive a benefit from it. And you actually, as a city, need to construct that improvement if someone pays you. Any questions with any of those sort of ground rules? Okay. All right, so in Arizona, we are required to adopt 3 separate components. So first is the land use assumptions. Essentially, this is just, hey, what's our population? How many jobs do we have today? And then over the next, 10 to 15 years, how do we think we're going to grow? So that's the first component, the land use assumptions. Next is the infrastructure improvements plan. So this is essentially the projects that you're going to construct over the next 10 to 15 years. And then the final component is the actual development fees themselves. Those get adopted separately from the land use assumptions and IIP, which is why tonight is a public hearing on the land use assumptions and the IIP and not the actual development fees. When we talk level of service, there's some things to remember that, we can't charge future development for a higher level of service than existing development receives. So an easy example is, park acres. If you have, 2 acres per 1,000 persons today, we wouldn't be able to charge future development based on 4 acres per 1,000. It's just essentially making sure that we're not overcharging future development because you cannot exceed the existing level of service. And then there are limitations on necessary public services, which is what Arizona defines as any sort of eligible capital improvement that we can include. So parks and libraries not applicable today, but some of the public safety limitations. It's no regional training facilities. So that's the really big one here. It's not so much of an issue on streets or on wastewater. All right. So essentially, we see this as 2 rounds. The first round, we're looking at land use assumptions and infrastructure improvements plan. Tonight, you'll have your public hearing on both of those. In 30 days, you can adopt those. Once those have been adopted, then we start the second round, which is the actual development fees. Again, you're going to see the development fees tonight. We want to be as transparent as possible. We want you to see what the fees are because really, the round 2 meetings are sort of a technicality because you've already adopted land use, you've already adopted the IIP, you've seen the fees. So once you've adopted the IIP, the fees aren't going to change. So really, we want you just to start seeing it from the very beginning. That way, if we need to make any changes, we can do that in advance because it really makes the adoption process a lot easier if we answer all the questions, make all the changes within this first round. All right. So May 6th, you posted the land use assumptions and IIP, so the actual document on your website. That started your clock. You have to have it there for 60 days before you can have a public hearing. So tonight, we're going to do a work session, and then we'll have the land use assumptions and IIP public hearing. Again, I just mentioned, you have to wait at least 30 days before you can adopt that. So, the potential adoption date for that is December 7th. On the 8th, you would advertise your development fees on your website. You have to wait 30 days. So January 18th, you would have your public hearing on the development fees. Wait another 30 days. March 1st, you could adopt your development fees. And then 75 days later, they would become effective. So essentially, we're talking, if all goes as planned, May 16th, you would have new fees for public safety, streets, and wastewater. So any questions on the adoption timeline, when and how we adopt or have public hearings, anything like that? Okay. All right, so let's talk eligible costs. So if a facility or improvement is required to serve new development, then we can include it as long as it's defined as a necessary public service by Arizona's enabling legislation. Maintenance and repairs. So I say if it starts with so rehab, repair, replace, that we cannot include in the development fees. So if you have excess capacity in an existing facility, we can include that and basically recover the cost of that excess capacity. So wastewater treatment is a great example of that. Because you have excess capacity, future development can buy into that and essentially repay you for that capital outlay. And then, if there are improvements that you need to correct an existing deficiency, it's sort of I would always say maybe you can include that because I'd want to ask more questions. Again, if you're fixing something and you're raising that level of service and it's adding capacity, then as long as you have an outside funding source to cover that repair, then we can include that And essentially it's, and you'll see this in the street component where we're widening a bridge. So we include the cost of that new lane, but we don't include the cost of, repaving those existing lanes. Essentially what we're trying to make sure of is that anything that we include is eligible, because we don't want you getting sued. No one wants to deal with that. We're dotting all of our I's, crossing all of our T's to make sure that everything that we include in this, is eligible. All right. All right. So there are 3 fee methodologies. We think of them as points in time, so past, present, future. So if it's something that you built in the past and you have excess capacity, then future development can buy into that excess capacity. So that's cost recovery, buy-in method. Those are all synonymous with each other. But anytime we're talking about something that exists and has excess capacity, we're going to refer to that as the cost recovery approach. Next up is the incremental methodology. So that's present. So however many acres of parks you have, or lane miles of roads, you just want to maintain that level of service. And so we just say, hey, whatever you have today, maintain that. This is what you would need based on our 10 years of projected growth. And then plan-based, where we're looking to the future and we say, okay, we need to get to this point. So we need to build another fire station. We need to expand our public safety facility. We need to get to this. So how do we pay for that? What is existing development share and what is future development share? So any questions on the methodologies? Okay. All right, and then finally, before we get into land use assumptions, we always look at credits. So there are 3 types of credits. There's a site-specific. So if a developer constructs something that we've included in the fee study, then we need to provide a credit for that. A good example would be if you were planning to widen a road and the developer said, you know what, we're just going to build this extra lane. Then we would say, okay, well, the developer needs to get a credit for that because it was something that we included as part of this. And so we can't charge them twice. Next up is debt service. And you'll see this a couple times later in the presentation where, we don't want someone paying twice for the same improvement. So if we include it in the fee study, and then future development would also generate revenue towards debt payments for that same improvement, we need to make sure that we credit out those debt payments so they're not charged twice. And then dedicated revenues. So property tax, local option sales tax, gas tax. Essentially, if any of those are going to be used for the exact same improvements that we're including, we would need to provide a credit for that. So any questions on credits before we move on to the actual land use assumptions? Okay. All right. So, I touched briefly earlier on, proportionate share and how we vary the demand by different land uses. So for, our residential proportionate share, we use persons per housing unit. So what you see, in the green with the red outline box, that is occupancy based on census data. And so it's basically saying, hey, based on your existing, housing units, single family dwellings have an occupancy rate of 3.49 persons per housing unit. Multifamily is 2.09. So whenever we, talk about a cost per person, all we're doing is then multiplying it by the number of persons per housing unit. We'll also use that to project future population. So when we say, hey, you're going to grow by this many housing units, we can convert it to population based on your existing occupancy. What you see at the bottom, these are building permits since 2015. And you can see, 2015, 2016, 2017, you were issuing a lot of permits. And 2018, 2019, you have a slowdown. Part of that is because you didn't have any subdivided lots. And so now that, you have some land opening up on the west side of town, our discussions with staff, we think you're going to see an increase in, the number of permits. It's going to be, similar to, 2015, 2016. And so while, you've averaged 86 single family permits per year since 2015, we think that it's likely that you'll see 125 single family permits per year over the next 10 years. With multifamily, we're actually, we're estimating about 10 multifamily units per year over the next 10 years. So any questions on any of the residential factors or how we're using those for projections? Okay. All right, the non-residential factors. What we've done here, so in 2020, you had about 1,600 jobs. We split those into 4 different categories. So industrial, commercial, office, and institutional. Mainly that's because they have different, trip generation rates. They have different employee occupancy densities. And so we separate those and, we assess the fees based on those 4 categories. And so based on 2020, employment and your population, we've said, okay, it's likely that you'll maintain that ratio of, jobs per housing unit over the next 10 years. And so, based on that, you have today or in 2020, 0.29 jobs per housing unit. So our projections of, employment and non-residential floor area are based on those housing unit projections, all right? So you can see all the way to the right, this is a 10-year increase. So we're saying that over the next 10 years, you would grow by 1,250 single family units and 100 multifamily units. And so when we apply those occupancy factors, that translates into a population in those housing units of about 4,600 people. When we apply that jobs to housing unit ratio, that says, hey, if you grow by 1,350 housing units, then you would have 387 additional jobs. And that translates into about 379,000 square feet of non-residential floor area. You will notice the largest increase is in the institutional category, which makes sense because you're building a high school. You're going to have, additional teachers. So, this follows the logic of, planned development over the next 10 years. So any questions on the land use assumptions? Okay. All right, so now we'll move into the infrastructure improvements plan. We'll start with public safety. So with this, we're looking at a citywide service area. We're looking at 3 components. So there's going to be a public safety facilities, which we use a plan-based because we know that you have your existing public safety facility with some debt on it, but the police department really needs an expansion to that. And then, fire needs an additional station. So we're looking at all of those as sort of one, planned level of service. Next up, we have the fire vehicles and apparatus. With that, we're using the incremental methodology where we say, hey, we've got this many vehicles and apparatus today. So if we grow by, this many housing units and this many, square feet of non-residential development, then we need a certain amount of additional vehicles and apparatus to maintain that. And then you have a ladder truck with existing debt, which runs through, I think it's 2025 or 26, somewhere right in there. And so we just want to recover that outstanding balance. And so the next few slides, we'll get into more detail, but sort of a high level is, with public safety facilities, we're looking at about $5.2 million of improvements over the next 15 years.
So what's the limit in time that the city will have to build this facility so we are assessing impact fees on construction?
Great question. So you have 10 years from the date of collection. So anything you collect this year, you need to spend it in 10 years. Next year, it moves on to another 10. So it allows you some flexibility because, it may not be that you do it all at once. It may be that you say, okay, you know what? In a couple of years, we're going to buy the land. And then a couple of years after that, we're going to start design. And then a couple of years after that, we'll actually start construction. So you can sort of phase it as the money comes in. It's not like you have to do everything all at once.
Yeah, my question is, we already have a property tax that takes into account for this, these public safety buildings. Why would we want to include them on this when we're already taxing them for it?
Great question. So I guess follow-up to that is the tax, is that for capital only, or does that include operations?
It's capital only, which would be the building itself.
And that's how you're, if I'm remembering correctly, that's how you're repaying the debt today, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. You'll see a credit in there for that, but it's just a way to, continue to expand as you grow.
Yeah, but that property tax is not going to go away. So it's designated by the voters for that, for road improvements and public safety building. So you really can't spend it on anything else besides that.
Right. And so that could go towards, existing development share of debt related to, your existing facility.
Yeah, that's what it's being used for. But what, in about 3 years, 4 years, 2026, we're going to be done. So I think it's a little unfair for us to be charging impact fees on something that we already have designated funding for. Granted that it'll be available in 4 years. But that's my concern that some of these items on here, I mean, I don't know how many members of council were approached as far as giving input on some of this stuff. Ladder truck, it's already paid for.
Right. So, what you'll see in here, and it's actually the last, couple of bullets on here, you owe almost 400,000. And so, existing development share of that would be, 246,000. Future development would be 148,000. But we do provide a credit for that revenue generated through 2026. So you could, your fees could cover, about $100,000 of that remaining debt.
But all that debt is already covered through those GATA. It's already designated for that debt. So I'm not understanding why would we want to include those numbers when that debt itself is already being covered.
Okay.
Mayor, and obviously it's future demands after 2026. The only question would be for mayor and council to make a decision on what happens after that debt is paid on that property tax. If it's going to be consistent on by council members Villapando's projects, then they'll continue, but it'll be based on what your decision is made for after 2026.
And my question, I guess, to that, and we could look at it later, is what language we had on when we went out to the border, to the voters. Is it, I know we've designated that towards public safety and streets, and that's what the taxpayers were told, but legally, what is it very restrictive, or is it open to other? And I guess that's probably something that we need to look at. But if, in essence, if it's not that restrictive to be used, then this would only be assessed to new development. So that would be. But my concern again is, are we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, the next slide. So we'll go ahead and go through all the public safety components. We'll figure out, how we want to move forward with this component. But just for the sake of you understanding, what's in the report. So these are your planned public safety facilities in the top left. So you have your existing, which has about $4.5 million worth of debt, an expansion to the police facility at the public safety facility, about 2,500 square feet, so about $750,000, and then an additional fire station of about 5,800 square feet or $2 million. And so what we're saying is that, once you build all this, you'll have, about 35,000 square feet of facilities. And so by 2036, it's assumed that you'd be using these facilities, and essentially you would be using all of the capacity with that. And so we're just allocating the cost of all these facilities to all development in 2036. And so when we do this, we say that about $2 million of that we could assess to future development or to growth, and then existing development share would be about $3.2 million. You've paid about $2.1 million in debt. And so that's the whole $7.3 million. But essentially what's important here is that, we can support future development paying about $2 million towards, existing debt, a police expansion and a fire expansion as well. Any questions related to that? Okay, so move on to the vehicles and apparatus. Oh, sorry, public safety credit. Because there is your dedicated property tax, this is the credit for that. So essentially making sure we don't charge twice. And so we're just saying, hey, we know that growth can pay for these capital improvements in the development fee, but we also want to make sure that we're crediting back those future property tax payments, so they're not being charged twice. All right, so next will be the vehicles and apparatus. With this one, it's incremental, so it's just saying, hey, we have 30 units today, and if we maintain that going forward, we would need about 7.4 additional units. The weighted average cost of your existing fleet is about $85,000 per unit. And so if you multiply 85,000 times 7.37 additional units, then over 10 years, you would generate about $626,000 towards additional vehicles and equipment. So this is expanding the fleet, not replacing anything. So any questions with the vehicles and equipment? Okay. Next up, we have the ladder truck. So the cost of that was about $1.3 million. Debt runs through 2026. And so essentially what we're doing here is just saying, hey, what is future development share over these next 5 years? And so with the remaining debt, we're saying, hey, future development, they're responsible for about 11% of this total cost. So we're saying, about $147,000 over the next 5 years. You've already retired, close to $1 million. So existing development share would be about $246,000 of that. Next slide. This is also a credit, again, making sure we don't charge once through the development fee and then once through the property tax. So this is just a credit to make sure we're not double dipping. All right, and then the next slide, this is going to be the proposed fees. So if you add up all those, cost per person, cost per trip, and what we're saying is, if a single family home has 3.49 persons per housing unit and the cumulative cost of all these public safety components is $300.86, then a single family home would pay $1,050 for public safety development fees. So we're talking about an increase of $177. You do see a slight decrease on the multifamily fee. That is mainly based on a change in occupancy rate. So in your previous study, it was closer to 2.5 persons per housing unit. So that's really the decrease here. And then you see for industrial, commercial, and office, an actual decrease compared to what you're paying today. Institutional would pay a slightly higher fee. So any questions related to public safety before we move on to streets? Okay. All right, so streets, we're looking at a citywide service area. We're looking at one component, so that's street improvements. These street improvements that were identified have a total cost of $2.2 million. Existing development shares about $275,000. The remaining $1.9 million can be recovered through development fees. All right, next slide. All right, so I could get into a lot of detail here, or I could just tell you that what you see here is a travel demand model, and it's saying that if your existing development is generating about 18,500 VMT today, based on those projections we saw a few slides back of 10 years worth of growth, that you would generate an additional 4,500 VMT. So we can support about 0.53 additional lane miles of street improvements. All right, next slide. And so what you can see here, these are the planned street improvements. So you can see that we do have 0.53 lane miles. That middle column is a total cost. And then the next one over is the growth share. So you can see that all of them have a 100% growth share, except for the Somerton Avenue Bridge expansion. That is a 39% growth share because you have 2 lanes existing today. You're adding an additional lane, so we cannot include the cost of rehabbing those existing lanes on the bridge. We can only include that additional lane. So what we're saying is that of the $2.2 million worth of planned projects, about $1.9 million is eligible, and so that's what's being generated by the fees. So we look at the next slide. These would be the proposed fees. So for a single family unit, we're talking about a street fee of $1,254. So an increase of $329. Again, these fees are going to generate, or they're going to cover almost all of these planned expenditures related to street improvements. Any questions about the street fees? Okay. So next up, we have wastewater facilities.
Councilman Villalpando.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
There's a developer that's right on the corner of that bridge. What if the traffic study requires some improvements on there and it's not identified on these impact fees? They still have to put it up. So why would we want to include it on here?
So you're saying, what if the traffic study says, hey, you as the developer need to add this
Correct.
Extra lane on the bridge?
Correct.
Great question. So I would.
See, that's a, to be honest with you, you guys did an awesome job with this. But I feel that a lot of this information that was put in there, I've been asking these guys, hey, did you guys know they were going to include this, and that? They've included a bunch of stuff that I feel that it's pumping up these numbers that we're going to be passing down to these developers. Mm-hmm. Well, we're trying to get a grocery store. Without the numbers, nobody wants to come by, at least not a major grocery store, a chain. So I feel that we need to tread carefully and actually look at these this wish list, mm-hmm. because I feel that we might alienate some developers and they might go elsewhere. I got to look at our impact fees and compare them to Yuma, to San Luis, because we're competing against them. But anyways, that was my question for the bridge itself. It's just the fact that I think we're jumping the gun and making all developers pay for something that maybe only one developer needs to address.
Mayor?
Yes.
We did have that discussion regarding that bridge and going for a culvert. The discussion was, is it for just that one developer? Is it impact all developments that actually go through there? And that was the major discussion that we had. And all staff, including Ben, we had the discussion regarding if it affects again, affects one developer or all. So it was a tough decision. I think that's when we discussed, well, it does affect everyone itself in terms of how many people actually go through Somerton Avenue in itself from San Luis to that area. So that was a discussion that we did have. In regards to public safety, we want to thank Cocopah. Actually, it seems like they're going to purchase a fire engine. So it might obviously drop those fees. And that's a discussion that we're still having, and their tribal council did approve it. And this just occurred here last Friday. So these are all news, brand new breaking news, I guess. But regards to that culvert, that's the discussion that we have, Councilmember Villalpando.
See, Mayor, and that's what I'm talking about. The staff it's subjective. We don't know, what's really the impact. I live nearby there, and I could probably tell you in the last year, I've crossed that bridge maybe twice, and I live like a block away. I don't take that route. So we're assuming that it's a big benefit for everybody. But quite honestly, if that bridge wasn't there, I could live without it because there's a culvert right off of Bingham to cross County. Yeah, Councilwoman Garcia. See what I mean? And guess where she lives? Las Estrellas, which is on that side. Who is the developer? We have our supervisor, county supervisor, saying YMPO. We got to look at the different options. We can't be so nearsighted and say, hey, yeah, this is what we're going to do. Because why? We're going to raise these fees to an amount that maybe, like I said, it might alienate some of these developers. We as council have to find that balance in between of what the study shows and versus what we feel it's the market can absorb, quite honestly. So, but anyways, those were just my 2 cents. Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments for streets before we move on to wastewater? Okay, so with wastewater, we're actually looking at 3 service areas. There is a citywide service area for treatment facilities. So no matter where you develop in the city, you're going to pay related to treatment because you're going to need, treatment capacity. Then we're looking at 2 separate service areas. One in the Northeast, which is essentially, east of Somerton Ave, north of Jefferson, south of County 15. That has a lift station. And then the 3rd service area would be Northwest, which is essentially the new high school area. So west of Avenue F, north of Main, south of County 15. Again, that one would also have a lift station. So what we're looking at is, over the next 10 years, you would need 334,000 gallons of treatment capacity to serve 10 years worth of growth. So that translates into about $2.5 million worth of treatment capacity. Now in the Northeast and the Northwest, this is going to serve the ultimate build out, which we don't think will happen within 10 years. You may get pretty close to it within the Northwest, but the Northeast, maybe you'll come up a little short. But essentially, it's $2.3 million worth of improvements related to that lift station and the lines, connecting it. And then in the Northwest, about $2.2 million for the lift station and the line related to that. So if we look at the next slide, this would be for treatment facilities citywide. So what we're doing is we're saying, hey, if the total cost of your treatment was $13.5 million, we want to say that you have about 50% of the capacity left. So the cost of that available capacity is about $6.7 million. We divide that by the available capacity, which is 894,000 gallons. And so what we're saying is that for every gallon you use, you should pay $7.52 for treatment capacity. And so if you generate 334,000 additional gallons of flows, then that's about $2.5 million over the next 10 years. You still have about $5.9 million worth of debt. So you would continue collecting this beyond the 10 years until you've repaid that debt. So assuming that, the average single family home or, the base meter of, a 3/4 inch uses 200 or generates 236 gallons of flows per day, you multiply that by the cost per gallon. And so someone should pay, or a single family home would pay about $1,800 for wastewater treatment citywide. And that's if they don't live in the Northwest or the Northeast. So we're looking at, a decrease of about $1,900 compared to, what they're paying today. The next slide, we'll look at the Northeast. So this is, the lift station is about $2.25 million. And then you have a gravity line of $50,000. So what we're really saying is, you have $2.3 million worth of improvements. And in your wastewater master plan, it says that this area would generate about 376,000 gallons of flows. So they should pay $6.12 per gallon for the lift station. So when you add the treatment facilities that you pay citywide to the lift station cost that you're going to pay in the Northeast, then the average single family home in the Northeast would pay a wastewater fee of about $3,200. So a decrease of about $500 compared to what they're paying today. All right, and then for the Northwest, again, we take the cost of the lift station and the gravity line, so it's about $2.15 million. The master plan says that area would generate about 417,000 gallons of flows, and so they should pay $5.16 per gallon. When you add that to the citywide treatment component, if you're developing in the Northwest, the average single family home would pay about $3,000. So a decrease of about $725. So any questions on any of the wastewater components? Okay. So the next slide, this is a fee summary. So again, we're not updating Parks and Rec today, but I still wanted to show it. So, essentially we're looking at proposed fees. If you update public safety and street of about $3,600 compared to about $3,100 today. So an increase of about $500 for a single family home. Again, once you factor in the decreases on wastewater, you're essentially breaking even, or the overall fee is going down depending on where you are in the city. Next slide. This is just showing all of your, water and wastewater fees. And so the top, those would be the citywide fees, the middle is the Northeast, and the bottom is the Northwest. So you can see, again, that the base meter size, your fees overall are decreasing by, $500 to about $1,900. When you get those larger meters, you're seeing a bigger decrease. So, that's one benefit that we should think about, when you're trying to get a grocery store, because they're going to need that larger meter. So while some of their fees are going up, the wastewater fees are, going down substantially. Right. And I think that was the last slide. So any questions or comments?
Any questions or comments? Well, just something I would like to see what the other entities are charging, so we can, like Councilman Villalpando mentioned, we can look at, compare, and see where what is a comparison. Any other questions? Okay. It's 6:49. Work sessions adjourned. Budget. Sí, va a bajar. Sí, va a bajar todo. Sí, pero sí entiendo que sí siento, pero eso del truck, del one part, tienen accidente. Entonces, yo tengo que John? No, lo dejaste grabando.